Good afternoon. As you know, if you've read our call out on Monday, the mayor and chief administrative officer for the city have agreed to sit down and answer your questions about this upcoming budget and the process around that. And we're going to do that right now. Thank you, Christian and Malcolm, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for having us here.
Yeah, of course. Well, maybe we can start by talking about where we are in the budget process and how that process unfolds from here.
Sure, I can start. And thank you and thank Derek for his expertise in putting this together, and all the team at SooToday, giving us the opportunity to talk to the community here and hopefully start, a larger, broader community discussion on our budget. Before we get going, I wanted to offer my congratulations and City Council's congratulations to Councillor Luke Dufour and his partner Elise Nelson for the birth of their second child. They had welcomed little Ivy May to the world and increased our population by 1. So we offer them our sincerest congratulations on that very exciting time. I also want to recognize that I'm wearing an orange shirt and our CAO is wearing an orange shirt, and we should recognize that it's Orange Shirt Day. We should acknowledge the Indian residential schools. We've had an Indian residential school in our own community here in Sault Ste. Marie, and the effect, the dramatic and really terrible effect that the residential schools had on our First Nation friends and residents and brothers and sisters. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge that we occupy lands that are historically lands of the Anishinaabe, that we share these lands with them. I want to recognize Garden River First Nation, Batchewana First Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, Missinaibi Cree, and also all of our friends that live in the community and our urban Indigenous population. So it's budget time again this year in Sault Ste. Marie, and what we generally do is staff works on the budget really throughout the year and brings us the budget in the fall. And before we receive the budget and the budget gets to council, we try every year to reach out to the community, to engage the community and receive feedback on the budget. COVID has affected our ability to do that this year to the same degree. Last year, you may recall that we did a bit of a State of the City address and we had an open house at the Bush Plain Museum. We weren't able to do that this year and stay compliant with Oklahoma public health guidelines. So we thought we needed to make different efforts to reach out to the community, and this is one of those efforts. So what will happen is staff works in the budget, puts the budget together, and brings the budget to City Council in the fall for discussion and deliberation. And this is the community's chance to offer us feedback on that prior to going to council. Obviously, when it gets to council, staff presents it to us, they table it, and then we have independent budget sessions where we discuss it. You always have an opportunity as residents of our community to reach out to your ward councillors or me to offer your direct kind of perspective to us on the budget, and we'll take that in consideration as we pass the budget. It's important to note that the budget that we pass is substantial, but it has a number of budgets in it. So in your municipal tax levy, you don't just get taxed on the resources and the funds that the city needs to operate the municipal corporation. The municipal corporation and the budget that City Council governs, that City Council is responsible for, is one part of our larger municipal budget, municipal levy. So the CAO can give you specifics on the total budget. Roughly, it's in the neighborhood of 190 million. But of that 190 million, roughly 120 million is the budget that is before council for its consideration. But we tax on behalf of other agencies in the community where that use municipal resources to operate. The libraries would be an example of that. The police service board would be an example of that. But the police services isn't governed by City Council. It's governed by a separate board and a separate agency. But the funds that are required to operate the police services are part of your municipal levy. So council tables and discusses and passes a budget, but that budget's only one part of the larger levy. But for a lot of the discussion that we'll have through the consultative process and the discussion that council will have only relates to that specific part of the budget. And it's important to recognize that. And
so in terms of that, sorry, just in terms of that, I just thought I would interject and say, when is that going to happen? What's the timeline for this? When will the final decision be made? How much consideration time is there right now?
So we've actually during the last council term, my first council term, we changed the budget cycle so that we were making decisions in late fall for the next year's budget. During my first year as mayor, the budget was tabled at the beginning of the year in Q1, and we make a decision by the end of Q1 on that year's budget. That was bothersome because, from my perspective, you're already one quarter way through the year, and one quarter of the budget was already allocated. So we now have a cycle that we essentially table and deliberate in late October, November, early December, mid-December. A decision will be made on what the budget looks like for the following year. So really, we intensely approach this where we engage in the public and get it to council late fall range and make a decision in early winter range around early December. So right now, council's city staff are out there engaging with the community, and the CAO will give you specific kind of dates or indication of the timelines, and I can give him a chance to answer that now on when staff plans on bringing the budget to council and when council will be asked to decide on it. Malcolm, did you want to offer anything in that respect?
Certainly, just building upon what the mayor said, budgeting has changed here over the years as far as the timetable goes. It used to be back in the day, we wouldn't be approving the budget till late March, early April. We've been able to move that up. The mayor noted that his first term, first budget was done in the Q1 of that year. That still gives us problems, of course, because if we're making decisions, we're already into the budget year, and it's sometimes more challenging to find a saving if you've already been 2 or 3 months into the process. The actual dates for this year are similar to the past few years. We're going to be accepting community feedback into the budget until October 9th, 2020, and you can do that by visiting the city's website at saultstmarie.ca/budget 2021. The preliminary budget, both the operating and the capital portions, will be tabled with council on November 30th. So we'll have a meeting on November 30th that will table that. That'll be the first chance for the public to see the budget in its preliminary form that's given to council. That's also when we will approach council about approving the user fees, which of course comprise a certain component of the budget. And then we'll be doing our budget deliberations on December 7th and, if needed, December 8th. We'll look at approval then, and then we come back in the new year with our tax policy analysis and setting the tax rates for 2021 in next March.
So I guess the question I was wondering is, we're talking about $120 million. Where, how's that generally broken up? Is it possible to say that? I guess in a sense, where are the largest chunks of money spent right now?
So the largest municipal expenditure from our own budget is public works. I think when you're looking at if you're looking at the entire budget, probably second to that is probably police. Malcolm would be able to give you a ranking of where the municipality spends most of its money on a department basis. But two of our biggest budgets are public works, the public works budget, and the policing budget.
Yeah, certainly for our corporate public works and engineering service area has the largest component of the budget. If we look at last year's budget figures, that's about 26% of the overall budget. And that's not just the corporate, but our overall levy. Our community development enterprise services is next, about 14% of that. And then fire services takes up the next large segment. The rest of our areas, such as corporate services, the legal department, mayor and council, CAO's office, make up a much smaller component of it. So the largest areas are public works and engineering and community development and enterprise services, with fire services being the third. Those take up the lion's share.
So interesting. So that's I think it's interesting to know sort of the layout of how that works before we get into this. But what people want to hear, I guess, are answers to their questions. We can do that now. Just one note before we do begin. city staff have had these questions so that we can get the best answers possible if we needed specific figures, etc. So anyways, the other note is to mention that some of these questions have been paraphrased for clarity. Well, here's a question that isn't paraphrased and addresses part of the extraordinary situation that we're in right now. So one reader asks, with the virus ongoing for longer than we expected, with the impact on businesses and the impact on city revenue and budgets, how does council expect to adjust services and spending, including capital, over the next few years? What will council include in budgets to assist in particular small businesses to survive this current economy?
So Mike, I'll start. I think there are two questions there. Like the first question is, what are we going to do on our own end as far as service provision and capital expenditures, right? And then the second question is, what are we going to do for small business? So as I'm understanding the question. So on the first question, I want to point everybody to an independent assessment of this. We recently had a Standards & Poor who rate the cities, give the city its credit rating, assess this year's performance. And so you have an independent, experienced, qualified third party who's in the business of assessing financial performance there. And they were very complimentary of city staff and the effort that city staff have made to curb our own spending during COVID-19. And, I think Malcolm and I are both of the same disposition in that we focus on the work, and maybe we don't spend enough time kind of talking maybe about some of the successes or pointing people to some of the work that we are doing so they feel reassured. And I know that there's a lot of anxiety in the community. And one of those anxieties is the cost of living and the increased cost of living. And we really should focus on ensuring people in our community that we are doing what we need to do. And I would point to that Standards & Poor report, that independent assessment, as evidence that we are doing what we need to do. So we're very conscientious about adjusting the services throughout COVID that we needed to adjust, and trying to find savings where we can find savings. At the same time, we want to lead. We want to make sure that we are still there for our community, and we're still moving important projects forward for two reasons. The first reason is we have to continue to look ahead. We can't become consumed in the present and in dealing with the virus at the expense of our future. So we have to continue to look ahead. We have to continue to move important and productive projects forward that are going to help our community thrive and grow. And we're focused on doing that. And the other thing we have to be conscientious about is that if the municipality does dramatic things with its own projects and its own budgets, that will have an effect on the community. And as we come through COVID and as we come out of COVID, we want to be one of the parties that is providing opportunities for the community to get the economy going. And just take our roads budget, right? So our roads budget is dependent upon by a number of local businesses for consistent annual revenues that they are able to access because they participate in that capital budget. If we were to substantially decrease that capital budget, we would have the problem of, one, not improving a number of roads that need to be improved and increasing a backlog of roads that need to be improved. And two is we would be taking those resources, away from our local economy. So we're going to keep on doing what we've been doing to date, which is watching all of the money we're spending, not spending where we don't need to, but prioritizing projects that are important to our future and prioritizing budgets that will help the community come through COVID, like our roads budget. So, we'll keep on doing the work that we've been doing to date. We'll keep on balancing as best we can the need to be conscientious of what we spend, but also the need to lead in the community and be one of the engines of the community to keep it forward focused and moving. And we're confident that we're going to have in the end, a productive year in that respect. On to the second question, of the three levels in government, we have the least amount of resources in our current budget to monetarily support small business. Really, the only line item in our budget that's already in our budget is our economic development fund. And there are demands on our economic development fund to produce, positive economic results. So those funds aren't necessarily all available to use to support COVID-related issues. So, we have throughout this process kept in touch with our business community. Tom Vare and the Community and Economic Development Department and the folks through our EDC have done a good job of communicating with and keeping in touch with the business community, connecting them to the resources available from the other orders of government, and doing what we can with what we can to support them. But we wouldn't have the ability to insert something else into the budget for support without increasing the levy, without actually adding to the levy. And the money that we already do have in there is pretty limited. So there isn't a whole lot we'll be able to do to support businesses monetarily. What we have to do, and I'm going to circle back to the point I made a couple minutes ago, is keep moving forward with things like our capital works budget and other projects that we know will be beneficial for the social and economic development of the community. Mr. CIO, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to either of those answers.
Building upon what the mayor has outlined, certainly we agree in that the city itself as a corporation is an engine to the local economy with much of the work we do, and it would affect the community if we scaled that back to any great degree. It would also, we need to position ourselves for coming out of the pandemic and growing the community. That's certainly something that we've had as a key goal, and it's how we will make our community more successful in the future. We need to keep doing that work. In addition, as the mayor notes, we have very little financial resources that we would be able to directly offer to business. Our efforts, therefore, are focused through our EDC staff and our community development and enterprise service staff in communicating with business, in facilitating and making sure they're aware and able to access the programs from the federal and provincial governments, that certainly those level of governments are far more well positioned in terms of financial resources to assist. One of the key things that we've had to figure out with the pandemic is it is something that doesn't affect all businesses equally. We do have to sort out through our communication with business those ones that have been affected most deeply, for example, the hospitality and tourism sector, and ensure we know what they need and we can help convey that information to the senior levels of government so that they provide assistance.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question, I think there's probably a similar answer to this, but we were asked, and this person I think is getting at the sense that a large proportion of the city's costs are related to public works, but they're asking, what can the city do to make the public works process more efficient and more productive? Can this department and others do more with less to reduce labor costs?
I'm going to defer to the CEO to answer that in the first instance, and if I want to add to anything he says, I will.
Certainly, I'd like to answer this question. It's a good question. It's a question we get often, and it's a valid question because of the amount of services we provide through that area and the significant share it takes up of the budget. The reality is we are leaner in that area than we are often given credit for. Our leanness and focus on core municipal factors, services in that area are key factors that have helped us mitigate the financial impacts of COVID and has helped us do as well as we have. For example, I'd like to mention we are always looking at ways to improve our level of service and make it more effective and efficient. An example of that is our recent move to automated waste pickup. As most people in the community know, we split the waste pickup in the community between our forces, who pick up roughly half of the households, and we contract out to GFL, who picks up the other half. For our half, which covers approximately 15,000 households, we formerly had just 4 FTEs, so 4 employees assigned to that work, so picking up from those households on a weekly basis all year. Going to an automated system, we were able to reduce that to 3 FTEs, which I would suggest to you is a very lean level of employees managing that service. It also assists us in cost avoidance for health and safety concerns because we don't have people outside of the trucks actually physically picking up the waste. And it really helped us out in dealing with pandemic concerns. Because we didn't have people actually handling household waste, it was a much healthier environment, and we didn't have to retrofit and put into place a bunch of different protocols that other communities who don't have that had to do. A couple of other examples out of that area. We have GPS tracking now for our entire public works fleet. This really helps us to have constant monitoring of the location of our fleet and how quickly they're able to do their services and if they're running into problems, and really helps us sort out whether a service is being provided as planned. So that really helps us with both efficiency and effectiveness. Ongoing, Council just approved the awarding of an RFP on Monday for a fleet management study for the public works area. This will be a very in-depth study which helps assess what our fleet needs are, what are the best ways of maintaining that fleet, and what are the best ways of ensuring we continue to have the resources to keep the fleet in good repair. So those are all examples of things that are being done in the public works area to make it more efficient and effective. I would also note, most people remember last January, we had KPMG report out to Council on a very in-depth review of the services we provide. They looked at all municipal services and noted that very little of the services we offer are offered at a premium level. In fact, there are only really 2 examples of where we do above the basic level of service. One of those was 2-hour free parking in our downtown municipal service lots. We will look at that with our downtown partners, but that wasn't obviously a large item. The one item that does have the potential possibly for saving and being more effective and efficient is snow removal and snow plowing. We do have a higher level of service than most other northern communities, so it is something we will look at. That being said, I have never really heard from either the public or council any desire to reduce our level of snow plowing and snow removal.
Mike, just to add a couple things to that. I really found the KPMG analysis instructive. You might recall that the province offered some resources to undertake essentially kind of efficiency audits and to take a look at your operations and what you can do better. And we were already in the process with KPMG of looking at things. So we reached out to the province and asked them if the resources that they were offering would qualify if we use them in a certain way, and they did. So we appreciate the province offering those resources, and we did that assessment through, and and respect an independent third-party firm. And I read that report, and it was very thorough. And when you look at it, when you look at where like you can kind of tighten things up and save money, one of the things that KPMG noted, and everybody who lives in Sault Ste. Marie, their experience is Sault Ste. Marie, so they don't necessarily know what's happening in other communities, is that, and Malcolm will correct me if my recollection's incorrect, but I think 76% of the services that we're providing are mandatory. So around 3/4 of them are mandatory, so we're required to do it. And the other 20 to 24%, or whatever that number was, but it was about a quarter if I recall, they're not mandatory, but they weren't discretionary in the sense that they're expected of a municipality. So like, you don't have to operate a rink. That's not mandatory, but your residents certainly expect you to have a rink, right? So what they were saying to us is there's nothing that you're doing outside of your mandate. And even the things that you're not statutorily required to do, your community certainly would expect you to do them. So they didn't have any suggestions as to you should stop doing these things. One of the things they did point out was that we could decrease our standards on snow removal. But in the 6 years that I've been the mayor of this community, I've never heard anybody tell me that the standards were too high. And I strongly suspect that if we reduce them, there would be a significant response to that. And I don't think it would be a positive response. So, we're working hard to try and keep our spending in line. And this is the point I want to end with. I'm not here saying, and Malcolm's not here saying, that taxes aren't expensive, and that we're doing everything that we need to be doing as well as we can. We recognize that we need to continue to work hard, but our challenges in this community aren't necessarily on the spending side; they're on the revenue side. We recognize that there are a number of things that go into taxes, and that there are some tax fairness issues here, which means that some of our classes are paying more taxes than they should be relative to other classes. So we have our residential class, our commercial class, and our industrial class. And there's some inequity in how those taxes are spread between those classes, and we recognize that. But we also recognize there's an affordability issue, in that there are some residential premises, because of the impact assessment on those premises, that the residential taxes that are allocated to those premises are high and feel unaffordable and may well be unaffordable. So we're sensitive to the affordability issues, and we're sensitive to the tax fairness issues. We recognize that we have work to do there, but that work goes to our assessment base, and that work goes to improving our assessment base, and that work goes to growing our assessment base so that we can more equitably spread the costs across that assessment base. The reality is there's only so much work you can do to bring the costs down without then sacrificing the service, or without providing a good service. So we need to provide good services to you, and we need to do that in a cost-effective basis. But the point is we can be doing both those things and still have a tax burden that's high, because our assessment is suppressed. We have to bring our assessment up. And we've had a number of assessment challenges in the last number of years. And it's something that council's mindful of, and something that council's talking about, and something that we're working on with staff and community partners to try and address.
Is there a sense of how that might be solved? Where we're going with that? If you're saying that the revenue is kind of the problem, not so much a spending issue.
Yeah, so we have a long-term tax policy to try and address the fairness issues I raised, Mike. But with respect to the affordability issues, part of what we're doing in response to that is trying to bring up the assessment in some areas of the community. And you've noticed over this council term a real focus on property standards and bylaw enforcement. And you've seen the city looking at kind of dealing with properties that are run down or vacant buildings. So we're focusing on some of the areas in our community where we can increase the assessment, or hopefully bring the assessment up, so that there's a more equitable and balanced distribution of those of the taxes amongst the class. But that takes time, and it takes some investment from us, but we'll still stay focused on it. The other thing you want to do is you want to grow your classes. So if we had a stronger industrial class, that would help the tax burden not only in that class but across the all of the classes. The same thing goes with our commercial class. So you've seen us implement community improvement plans, which are plans to target tax incentives and tax breaks on realty development, whether it's commercial, industrial, or residential realty development. There's different programs that we have in place to try and encourage development, because in development, in the end, increases the assessment base. We lost a ton of assessment over the last assessment period in non-residential classes. And that really affected our ability to spread the tax burden across in a fair way across the whole assessment. So, they're long-term solutions, but we're focused on them and we're working on them.
Well, again, on the subject of revenue, one reader is kind of pointing out, like, hey, with the situation we're in with the pandemic, maybe there's a possibility that the province isn't going to be funding municipalities to the extent that it has in the past. Here's the question, I guess: does the city's proposed budget, or I guess proposed budget that will come, have an allocation for a provincial government contingency fund in an effort to plan for for that eventuality where there's potentially not, the province isn't in a position to provide previous funding levels to the city?
So we as I understand, the CEO can confirm this, we expect to receive the same OMPF funding next year as we did this year, or we expect the formula to stay the same for 2021 as it was for 2020. So we don't expect a drop in that respect, nor do I personally think there should be one. You know, all three levels of government have pressure on them as a result of COVID. But the reality is, and something that isn't commonly understood, is that the province takes a significant chunk of money out of our tax base, out of our municipal tax base, to fund provincial services. And the last time I looked at those numbers, the number that the province took out of the tax base to fund provincial services like Ontario Works was greater than the funding that we received in return from the OMPF, at the very least equal to, but I believe greater than. So the reality is the province would be hard pressed, I think, to decrease our annual funding if it was going to continue to draw the same amount or more out of the municipal tax base to fund provincial programs. But we don't plan, I certainly don't plan, I can't speak for the rest of council, I don't expect it does, I haven't heard from it that it does, to add an additional line item in to cover the potential of any decrease from the province. And just to be clear, Mike, if we were to do that, if we were to add a item in our line item, a line in our budget, that would hit the tax levy. So all we would be doing is going to the same taxpayer and saying, look, we expect the province might drop its funding, so we're going to tax you for that. We have no reason to believe the province will drop its funding. I don't believe the province will drop its funding, so I wouldn't be comfortable adding that to the tax levy. If the province did drop its funding, we wouldn't find that out until we were into the budget year, and if that resulted in a deficit, that would end up on the levy. So I wouldn't tax for it ahead of the time, or I wouldn't be agreeable to taxing for it ahead of the time and taking that money out of people's pockets before we were sure it was needed, but I don't think it will be needed for 2021.
Okay, excellent. I thought it was an interesting question, an interesting answer to that. The next questions are kind of specific. I'll throw those out here. There's right now the city is working on plans for a downtown plaza. Someone asks, you know, could that be expanded? Would Spring Street, would there be any purchasing of vacant buildings in the Spring Street area that could be part of that? Could it expand in the future?
So it could, for sure. The city has purchased some realty to complement the plaza to make sure that we could do the project that we want to do, that everybody would be proud of. And we have identified the pieces that we needed in those respects, and we have reached agreement on those pieces, and we'll be incorporating them into the plaza when it moves forward, as we expect it will, if it does. We're certainly hopeful that it will. But look, we think that that's a great investment that to some degree is staged. And could the city in the future obtain more property to add to the plaza? Absolutely. But we also hope and expect the private sector would. If we hope and expect it will become a place where people see the value in investing around it, the private sector wants to put investments around it to create more activity there. So certainly something I think the city would be open to in the future, but it's something that I expect we'll see the private sector also participate in.
Okay, excellent. One reader asked, and this is sort of a a cause and effect question: is the purchase of the former Studio 10 property going to mean that your taxes are going to go up? So are my taxes going to go up because of that?
Yeah, I welcome the opportunity to answer that question. The answer very quickly and simply is no. Your taxes won't go up. A couple points on that. That wasn't a quick decision, and it wasn't something that we didn't deliberate over for a significant period of time. And it was something that there were a lot of discussions about between the city and the property owner, and council, a lot of discussions on council about. But we have a reserve fund at the city for that type of activity, for when we have opportunities to buy property that we might either need or might either or determine it attractive to buy for specific reasons. We are comfortable that if we don't decide to keep the property for our own purposes, that we'll be able to recover, at least some significant part of the purchase price on that property. We do want to point out, or I do want to point out, the significant development in that area, not just the Canal District, which we want to support. We have the Gateway development with our First Nation partners that we're still moving forward on, and we're confident and hopeful will continue to move forward. And we have a James Street revitalization project we want to work on, and that we want to improve that area. So in the context of the activity in that area and some of the city's current and future goals, and the opportunity presented itself when it did. So the timing was as a matter of kind of the fact of the situation. And the city, thought long and hard about it, had a number of discussions, and made the decision to move forward with the purchase. And I can absolutely confirm that purchase will not hit the tax levy.
Okay, thank you. Another very specific question. One reader suggests that perhaps synchronizing our stoplights would prevent idling. I'm actually not sure whether stoplights are synchronized or not. Are they? And does this make sense?
Mike, I'm gonna defer to the CAO because I feel very strongly that most, if not all, matters of traffic should be administrative and staff matters and not political matters. So I'm going to have the CAO. Let the CAO answer that.
Another great question. Certainly signals are synchronized right now to the limits of our existing technology. That technology is dated and needs to be expanded. We have acquired a new system which will assist us greatly in synchronizing that. However, we need to connect the system to lights over time. You have a connectivity issue, you have a hardware issue with what you have out at the lights, and then the system and getting it to talk back and forth and programming it appropriately. So it is something that we agree with. Synchronizing the light systems is a good way to prevent idling and also to manage traffic flow throughout the city. So we are moving in that direction as fast as we can resource it properly. As to the question of could stoplights be set to flash at nighttime? We have looked into that in the past. Council's asked us to look at it. It isn't a recommended practice necessarily. It is something that you really have to examine on an intersection by intersection basis. When we look at broad solutions like that, or broad ways of doing things, each intersection in the city has its own flows, has its own unique features, and that's why we have to examine things in the way we do. We did make some progress this year in that during the 2020 budget, Council did allocate a certain amount of funding, allowing us to retain some third-party traffic engineering expertise that is assisting us in making sure we have the optimum type of signalization and layouts at different intersections in the city.
Interesting. Yeah. It does seem to be, it would be an environmental issue and also a safety issue at the same time. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I think these are all the questions that we have that are submitted. I thank you both for joining me for this. And I hope we can do something again next week. And if people haven't seen their questions answered, maybe they can send more in. We'll specifically put out another call for input, for questions as well. And we'll resume this. But I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd be happy to participate again next week. I'm happy to answer people's questions. And I really encourage people to visit the city's website to offer your feedback, to offer your perspective. It's important. We care about it. We do listen. And we will continue to work as hard as we can to be respectful of how we spend the taxpayers' dollars.